sure that you listen to the Mako person because we do everything for a reason. We are fully certified. You have to follow the instructions, especially with these visit discs. Number one, make sure these all are down. They come in these white trays and the various orientations for the arrays that they are meant for. It's best to put it on a flat surface, line it up with the posts, press hard as you can down. Oftentimes it will not click. I gotta line it up better, there we go. It will not click. You want to hear a clicking sound, and when you lift it back up, oftentimes they'll get stuck in there like this one. And you simply press down, twist to the right like you're screwing it on. They're not screw-on, they're just pop-on, but to make sure they're fully
Cancel the case.
seated, so that doesn't happen. Press as hard as you can, twist to the right a little bit so you don't see any silver behind it. If you do, it may or may not pass, but eventually it will affect the overall accuracy of the system, which you don't want to have happen to the patient, obviously for patient safety. That's the whole point of this system. So everything, all these have to be tight. Always check to make sure they're all fully seated. If they're not fully seated, oftentimes we'll find during the calibration that the accuracy is over 1 millimeter. We want everything below 1 millimeter, sub-millimeter accuracy. That's what we say about the robot. We got bone pin arrays here. So typically for a total knee, you've got 2 short pins and 2 long pins. The 2 shorter ones are for the tibia. There's less tissue here. Did I hit something else?
No.
Girl, just sit down, girl. Jeez, come on.
They come in 2 thicknesses. This is 4.0. You can see the square shape. That indicates 4 millimeters. These are thicker ones. The 3.2 are round on this edge. If we're ever not in the room, you're wondering what size you opened when you're setting your collet for the quick release on the Stryker System 7 or System 8, that's a quick way for you to know. And basically when the doctor puts these in, they'll make 2 stab incisions. They'll spread it open with, forceps or something like that. And they'll go bicortical purchase. That's what they're feeling for. I've actually felt it in the bowel skeletio and cadavers. You can feel the other side. You go through one side and you feel the other side, they stop. But they still want enough protruding out of the tibia so you can slide over these stabilizers. We call these shorts. So they'll slide over like this. And they'll actually drill one into the tibia, use this as a guide for the second bone pin. Drill that all the way down. And then the black array over here is for the tibia. Slide that over all the way down. Just make sure these knobs are loosened up for the doctors so they don't have to mess with this too much. And then eventually we will point these arrays at this camera over here. This camera sends out an infrared signal. These reflective surfaces bounce it back. And that's basically GPS tracking, kind of like your navigation or your phone now. We don't have GPS devices anymore. That's really how that works. Configuration, it knows what's tibia, because all these are different shapes. This is the femur, the silver. It also says on the back, femur, tibia, in case you're ever questioning what it is. This is also the end effector array. This is used for the probe check, accuracy check, as well as the real registration. We're doing a cube shape on the robot. This is basically telling the robot, when we have this up typically, this is typically inserted here. Oh, that's another thing too. When we drape, there's a pin right here. You want to line up with this slot. And there's a plastic ring. The trick is to push this pin through that plastic ring straight in against the spring, turn to the right to lock it. That's pretty important because one time we had this kind of just on the edge here. I'm going to try to imitate what happened. We pushed the robot in during the case, and while we were pushing it in, they checked the divot with the green probe. It passed accuracy. Once it dropped, this popped out. That's really bad because now it thinks the tip of this saw blade is 15 or 20 millimeters off of where it should be. The doctor wasn't looking at the bone only looking at the screen, he cut down. It was a couple inches onto the femur until he realized it was too late. Luckily, we had revision stuff there that day. I wasn't there for that case, but that was kind of a nightmare scenario. So it's very important. This is pressed all the way in, turn to the right, and locked on.
It's always good. If we ask you guys to do a steering wheel test, you just grab it and shake it. It should not move. So that's a good way to know that it's on there correctly.
Good. This should always be tightened. Like we double fist this before it's draped to make sure this is not going to move as well. So this will also affect the accuracy. After we do the registration, the Q portion, after the robot's draped. But going back to the bone pins, we got the shorts for the tibia again. These are longer ones for the femur because obviously the patient or the femur has more tissue. You have to get all the way down. The doctor's instructed to get this down to bone. All the way down to bone with both bone pins. Again, this is 3.2. But this will slide over. We have different sizes too for whichever thickness we have. Oh, here we go. 4 millimeters. Just make sure you grab the right one so you don't do what I just did. Hand it to the doctor with the wrong thickness so they slide over. Again, he'll drill one down, slide this over that first one, use it as a drill guide, drill that down, and then slide these over. And again, point this at the camera for optimization. We really want those at the camera about 90 degrees to the ground and facing somewhat upward. That seems to be optimal so that the doctor can put the leg through range of motion. They can still view both arrays at the same time, especially through extension and flexion while we're capturing pose captures. We got two probes here. One is sharp. It's very sharp actually, so be careful when you're handling this. This is meant to go through cartilage down to bone because the patient's CT scan or 3D image based off a CT scan, which is bone. There's no tissue on this. So he has to match that. After these are tightened down, the system already has a 3D image. It needs to know where in space, where to place the 3D image so that he'll start painting the surface with the blue probe, typically going through cartilage. He'll capture 32 points and then 32 points on the tibia as well with the blue probe. The green probe is mainly for the checkpoints, which there are two different ones. These go to the femur. This is a femoral checkpoint. It has a hood on it. There's like a little divot on the side, sideways. Tibial checkpoint is just straight on top, kind of like just a regular screw and nail or a headed nail. And it has a divot on top. You load these by pulling this down. It slides in sideways like such. Locks on. It shouldn't fall off. But you should just check, make sure. Sometimes you can get it slightly on there and it'll tumble off. So you always want to check that. Yeah, so this goes in on the medial side. This has already been cut, but it normally goes kind of like right here. It's meant to be pounded in. And with the divot pointed upwards, so the green probe can be placed inside the divot. We capture that twice. It has to be in solid bone. And it's oftentimes the tech can see or help the doctor too. If the doctor sometimes doesn't notice this is moving, so you can kind of speak up and say, hey, that's kind of moving around in there. It's still spinning, or it's really poor quality bone. You got to take this out and put it somewhere else. Even like all the way up here, you got to find it. Otherwise, if it's all poor bone everywhere, you got to use like a Bovie mark, which in the case we won't use one of these. Tibial checkpoint goes on the lower portion of your tibial incision. So typically they'll go down here. They'll pound that in right on the anterior face of it. That's typically a good spot. It's not hard to find a good position for that. Green probe is also used for the medial and lateral malleoli. That is to establish the mechanical knee axis, which is what all these numbers are based off of. We already set those on priorly on the CT landmarks, and he's basically superimposing with this probe where the ankle is and the hip center. He'll do this other kind of range of motion with the hip center to find that center rotation to really establish the mechanical axis. Mechanical axis is important for all of this, and again, this all comes down to these being tight on the patient. To really tighten these down, you got to use the screwdriver here as well for all 3 knobs. We say top, side, back to lessen the torque applied to these in the bone. So again, how we instruct the surgeon to go top side, side, and then the back lastly, because this is right on top of the bone pins. You don't want to torque the bone pins too much. Sometimes they break, especially the thinner 3.2 bone pins in the tibia. We've had plenty of those in the past, but they have been redesigned a couple of years ago and seems to be working out pretty well with the structural components of it, metal as well as a sharper point on it as well. So we're not really having those issues. Anything else, Liza?
I'm just saying about how to blade on the attachment.
Oh yeah, so we got 2 attachments here for the saw blade. These go into the mix gun, which we don't have. You just grab the silver collar here, you unlock it, you plug it in. We'll instruct you as far as where it kind of slides in for ease of access. But also you never want to use the wrench here to tighten, only to loosen. If you tighten this on with the wrench, these go bad immediately, and it actually affects the cutting ability as well as it makes it super loud for the surgeon. So when you're placing these on, just like puzzle, just like all your other saw blades, press in, press this down, and then hand tighten this knob here as much as you can, and that's it. It's self-tightening, so once you plug it in and he starts sawing away, this will start rattling quite a bit, and that's normal. A lot of surgeons will see that the first 10, 15 cases and ask if that's okay, and yeah, it's just rattling all the way, all around here. And then that's for 2 cuts. This is for a total knee. I'm going to loosen this up, then we're going to swap in mid-case, and we're going to place this in the straight saw blade attachment. And again, you're just going to position in there, tighten this down with your hand only, and plug it into the power. That's for the rest of the cuts. For the burr, there are different attachments. Really going over the total knee application right now. Anything else like
I
that?
think we should choose a question.
Yeah.
Just a reminder that for the total, open the standard blade, right? And then for the Unity, the narrow one, because they've seen multiple times that for both cases, they open both blades.
That's a good point. So for a size 3 on a total knee and above, we use a standard. If it's a size 2 on either femur or tibia, we have to use the narrow saw blade. And you can see the difference here. So say you have a 3 femur, 2 tibia, we still have to use the narrow one. Oftentimes now surgeons will just make the tibia a size 3 so we can use the thicker one in faster cutting. And then they'll actually downsize after they've cut to a 2. But 2 and below, we got to use the narrow. For a partial knee, we have to use a narrow saw blade because we're only doing 2 cuts on part of the knee. So we want a little smaller saw blade in there.
Yeah, I would say it's a safe bet to always hold and ask us, because I think that's where you guys are wasting them. You open both. You'll never need 2 different saw blades. You only ever need 1. So it's a good case to hold it.
We also have these spoons here. We have 2 of each. We'll ask you to grab the spoons. These are on the bottom of the array tray, which is right over here. They use these to create a gap or apply tension to the MCL and the lateral side while we're capturing poses. What we're doing there is basically applying tension for what the doctor wants post-operatively. So we want to make sure if they come in with a varus knee or valgus knee, we can correct that knee. So if they're bow-legged or knock-kneed, we can actually kind of make them straighter, if not completely straight, based on ligament tension. We're never going to overcorrect because you're going to have one side too tight and the other side's going to be too loose, and it'll be kind of wonky for that patient. What she's doing right now is the homing. That allows us to move the robotic arm around, but we do this pre-surgery. We have our own checks prior to the case, which you'll see every case we come in. We make sure it's calibrated and everything's accurate, the brakes are working. We never want the surgeon to come in and start cutting and the brakes don't work and it allows them to go too deep. That's the whole point of using this. That's the beauty of the system too, is that we're sculpting out, especially with the partial knee, we're sculpting out just the footprint of the implant based on where we set it 3-dimensionally, how deep, and the system knows where in space this is based on these arrays, which are fixed to the bone. It's based on a CT scan from the 3D image. The doctor feels resistance on the robotic arm, and this audio as well. You might hear it. That's the robot's telling them, hey, you're approaching that boundary, you're going too deep. And it'll also change colors on the image to turn red. Anything beyond red, either for a total knee or a partial knee, it'll shut down the system. Let's see here.
Can we go through draping?
Yeah, let's go through draping. For these drapes, you want to open up, this is freshly out of the package, you want to open it up sideways, like such. The arrows are going to be on the side away from you, and we ask that you break just a few of them. Kind of helps open up the drape itself to get on the robot. There's going to be 2 sleeves. One sleeve, which is a larger sleeve, which has the big blue stickers, and it go over the bigger part of the arm. There's a smaller arm here, which is meant for this smaller blue sticker here. Recently in manufacturing, they've been pushing it through the opposite side, so we ask you to push it back to the side that the big glue sticker is on. Now it's ready. You can see hands on here. The left hand here, right hand here. This is for a right knee. If it were a left knee, you just do the opposite. You put your right hand where the left hand is and vice versa. You basically put your hands here in the sleeves. You're sterile. This is OR tech doing this. We're going to be back behind the robot. We're going to tell you put your right hand on here, left hand here, and Liza or me will pull it over. What's also important is that you pull this over this black knob here to allow us to get it all the way around. So pull that down and then push this on all the way around the elbow too to give enough slack to pull it all the way down. And it's easy peasy. And we'll be pulling it down from the bottom there. That's it. Now, what's also important here, when you're tearing this off, what's below here has been contaminated now because you have an open face base mount here for the power. So once you tear that off, just drop it or hand it off to us. Make sure you don't contaminate your hand with that. And very importantly, this plastic ring here you see, you want this completely flush around this metal circle, the indentation part, and oftentimes you're going to pull down from below. You'll already have this sometimes with your Mako stand. I recommend a Mako stand close by, or if you're a pro like Gus or Miranda or whoever, they already have this kind of wrapped on their arm. This is always going to point outward too, either a total knee or a partial knee or a total hip. This will always point outward. And you can see down here there's 2 screws with one big knob. You can see it, how it lines up on the bottom. But again, you want to make sure this is already moving. You got to line this up so that plastic ring does not get wedged in between, kind of like up here. If this were up here like that and you were to put that on there, this will affect the accuracy and it won't pass real registration. So every little detail matters. So again, I'm going to pull that plastic ring around, mount it. You can use your fingers to hand tighten if you want, just to get it started. And then eventually you're going to use the same screwdriver you use for the arrays on the bones. You want to do it finger tight, and you can adjust this handle, kind of spins back and forth by this silver knob on the bottom here. You press down, or actually, yeah, down that way, which is up, upside down. You can turn that out of the way so you can get to both screws. But typically when you have this, when you're going to hand this off to the doctor, you want to kind of point it directly straight up, lock it in place there. Some doctors prefer it loose when they're actually cutting so they can just move their hand freely for the right angle. But typically you want it locked in there. And then this is the calibration assembly here, which I was talking about earlier. There's this red area right here. That means it's unlocked and open. That means you can plug things in there. Turn this big silver knob to lock it on. Also make sure this little silver ball here is touching the black here. That'll affect accuracy as well. Then you turn this knob here, tighten it down. Face it that way. This is where the camera's going to be. It's not set up or simulating an operating room right now. But the camera will be on that side, as well as this large base array. Again, I got the pin here. I'm gonna line up the hole. And be sure if you press it inward, don't pull it back out because that's gonna be contaminated now. Once you press it in, just leave it in there and try to figure out where it is. But you have to line it up perfectly straight. If you're bent, if you're canted ever so slightly up or down, it's not gonna be able to be pressed in. Press in, turn to the right, lock it on, and then do as Liza said, give it a little check, make sure it's locked on. This cord you're going to hand off to the other side to us. Preferably it's untangled. And then we plug it into the back for power. You got 2 Velcro straps on the bottom here. Be gentle with these things, otherwise if you yank too hard, it'll actually rip a hole in the plastic. You want to do it very gently. Again, typically these 2 are good. But we do have another one on the elbow here. You really want to have it secured. And what I'm looking at here too is not too much slack. If there's too much slack kind of protruding out like that, when the doctor's trying to use this, can you lock it? He's trying to use this, you can see this is like going to get in his way. You don't want that, just take that slack out. But you don't want it pinching. Otherwise, that might affect the functionality. That's a good amount of slack, or even a little more, just not too much where it's touching the doctor as he's using this.
You want to try to?
Is that?
You want to try to do registration right now?
Yeah. So typically, this is what we'll have the OR tech do. It says hold triggers to start alignment. This is the only time when the robot will move on its own, is when you're pressing and holding this. I'm allowing it where it wants to go. Typically the camera will be over there. Yeah, you might as well.
Down. You get right your way, Matt?
No, you're good.
This is what's called real registration. This is telling the system where the tip of the burr or the tip of the saw blade is going to be relative to this array here. So after we do this registration, this arm here cannot be bumped. Otherwise, it will affect the accuracy. That's why we, as MPSs, double fist this knob to make sure that is really fixated in place. Liza's adjusting the camera. I've already squeezed and hold the trigger. He's going to go forward to real registration. Hit start. Although I'm going to drop the robot first so it's stable. And typically, so what you don't want to do is squeeze the trigger right now because that does nothing. What you see on the screen there, that's your blue dot. It only allows you to go in one direction. And what it's doing is collecting these points. So once you pull the click in place, let go, let it collect. Otherwise, if you're doing this, wiggling it around, it won't collect that because it's trying to have these arrays or these little discs still in place.
And this should be, you should be able to use 2 fingers to do it. You really shouldn't fight the robot. It's a very, 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 very light touch.
That's the first portion. The second part is making sure the joint 6, which is this one here, is still accurate as well. He's going to hit start. I pointed it down. It's asking to go past 120 degrees. I'm going to rotate it up. There we go. It's 1 millimeter accuracy. If it's green, it's good. If it's yellow or red, it's not good. We have to redo it. And check to make sure that plastic ring is fully seated down here. Make sure all these discs are down. Make sure this little ball is touching, and make sure this is locked in place along with all these black discs are fully seated as well. Again, every little detail matters. I'm going to do a probe check now. I like to hold this straight up at 12 o'clock. There's a white circle on one of the arms here. So if you're holding this at 12 o'clock, you're going to face these towards the camera. This circle here is actually, it's a cone going down inside. So if you're holding this at an angle, it's not going to pass the accuracy check. You want to actually go straight into the circle like so. Liza will hit capture. There it is, 0.8. It does it automatically. So here, I'll do it on purpose. If I'm going in sideways like this, it's 2.8, 2.9, because I'm not all the way down into that cone. There we go. You want to go straight down. Don't bash this one either, especially the blue probe. This is a point where you can easily bend the tip. We have to send these back quite often because this one is such a fine, long point. They get bent quite often and it doesn't pass accuracy. So it's very important, this one, especially after the case, place it back in the tray to make sure it doesn't get bent, getting thrown into a metal bin of some sort. Anything else? Any questions at this point? We can load up this with the, typically for a total knee, we're going to use the angled saw blade attachment. It's the larger of the two. This is the straight saw blade attachment. I'm going to flip this back around. Go straight down. This is red, meaning it's open. It's down and slightly in towards the robot. That's the starting access point. And then last, I'm going to squeeze and hold the trigger. We got to come back, lock it in place. Otherwise, if it moves from this position, you do it. The doctor has to do it again. Continue. The goal is so it's already in place. We move it in towards the patient. We unlock it from the back. The doctor is ready to go immediately for the doctor. He doesn't have to do any of this registration stuff. It's only the OR tech doing this prior to the patient coming in or while the patient is being prepped and draped.
I have a question.
Yep.
Why do you use saline on only the unis and not the
Good question. The uni, we actually have a burr attachment with a shaft. So this is going to be sticking out right here with a shaft right here. And while you're burring, we have a little clip that goes on the shaft that shoots out water. For the total knee, there's nowhere for the clip to sit on these attachments. You'd need a really large clip to go on this. And theoretically, they can make one, but most doctors, while they're cutting for a total knee manually, they don't use irrigation, or they might have the OR tech just kind of bolt syringe it. So that's the answer, I guess. This is too thick for the clip that we have. Any other questions? For the total hip application, it's a different attachment. We have a long kind of gun-looking thing that we put in another shaft, and this connects to it for power. But typically, this will be resting here. We have a holster. Let me get that out. It's really important to show you. Let me push it through. Push the bar through.
Oh, yeah.
We typically have this already set up for a total hip. This bar slides through here. This is a holster. And we got a pad right here in the drape that's kind of meant to go seated down inside that. This gun actually sits in there. It's not going to be affixed. We have a different attachment here. And this basically is used when we're reaming only after we push the robot in. After reaming, we take it off. We swap out the reamer shaft for the impactor shaft. That's where it sits for a total knee or a total hip until we're reaming. Hips are very easy, a lot less stuff to set up, a lot easier to register as well. Anything else?
I would just say you guys are doing great. Thank you so much. It's really kind of it's enjoyable to come work with you guys. You do the system really well, so yeah, just thank you.
Nice.
Hey, you guys are rock stars here.
Gina, I'm gonna run to Denise's office.
Enjoy your lunch.